Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve. Today, we're going to be going over my overall rankings. There should be a link in the description to the overall rankings, so go check those out if you wish to have them. There might be an update in here that we're going to do. I'm thinking. So, we're going to go through my overall rankings as well as some updates that I have made to each of my positions as well after that. Give you a little bit of talk. I had a draft that I will probably reference a few times throughout this with some of the decisions that I had to make in that draft this past Saturday. So, we continue to get news, we continue to get updates on things, and so the rankings do change. We try not to overreact, but we also want to react to things as well. Sometimes things that maybe I should have reacted to quicker, or, just takes that I've been stubborn on and I gotta move on from. So, that is what we will be looking at here in this video. And let's get started right after I let you know that every Tuesday and Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can come here. You could practice for your own drafts with our group that we've been doing, 10-team, 12-team, kind of take a survey of the group that we have and what they need to practice on, try and get you into the right position so you can practice for any of your specific drafts. Please come and join us. We have a good time. So, overall rankings on the screen over there, isn't over in that direction. And we've got Ja'Marr Chase right at the top, followed by CeeDee Lamb, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson. I originally had ahead of this group just right next to CeeDee Lamb, but with the hamstring injury, which actually I'm not too concerned about, but I think that these guys are just a little bit safer given the hamstring thing going on with Justin Jefferson. We know how hamstrings can derail seasons. He's had a lot of time to heal. I'm not, once again, overly concerned about it, but hopefully it'll work out fine. And these three running backs here in this order. And if you want to take any of them over CeeDee Lamb, I get that. I think there is legitimacy to saying the upside for CeeDee Lamb gets a little bit capped with George Pickens being there. That's possible. Not to say that we don't have other wide receivers with other wide receivers on their teams as well. You know, you look at A.J. Brown down here. He's definitely got another wide receiver. You look at, Nico Collins has some incoming wide receivers opposite of them. Ja'Marr Chase has T. Higgins, who is, I think, generally the highest probably of these other receiving groups, and we're taking him number one. So, obviously, it depends exactly of how much you think about this Dallas offense and where the ceiling is for that offense, and I think it's quite high. But, I get it if you want to take one of these guys, be a little bit safer on that end. And after Justin Jefferson, we've got Christian McCaffrey, Malik Nabers, Nico Collins, Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, and Chase Brown in this tier. Now, just a short little bit before my draft, I did catch the news on Devon Achane's soft tissue injury, and I did think about it when I made my pick. And I was between Achane and Chase Brown with my early second-round pick. And I decided to stick with my rankings. I hadn't had too much time to absorb the injury news on Achane. Soft tissue, I want more information on this before I make too much of a move, but I think it's scary enough. I mean, the news right now is anywhere from days to weeks, and at this point in the offseason, now that is concerning me. You know, when Justin Jefferson had a soft tissue injury, when A.J. Brown had soft tissue injury weeks ago, it's like, well, they've got an appropriate amount of time to come back, be healthy. Worst case scenario, maybe they're not at full go to begin the season, pretty much how, not technically worst case, but, pretty much what the worst case scenario was. And so I'm thinking at this point, I'll take Chase Brown. So, I know I might be a little bit high on Chase Brown, especially having him into this tier compared to some others, but tell me why Chase doesn't have all the same upside and maybe even more given the offense that he's on than somebody like Achane does. Once Chase Brown became the starter last season, and now there's no competition on that roster to really take too much a difference of a workload. Maybe it'll be a little bit less than last year, but that can only help his efficiency if he's relying on just a little bit less. Chase Brown is going to be on possibly, the highest scoring offense again this year in Cincinnati. Plenty of touchdown opportunities. The staff is talking about him like a beast. This is a guy who I had coming out of the draft with Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, who I had as a 1A and a 1B. I actually did not have them separated into a 1-2 running back in that draft class. I had Achane and Chase Brown. I believe they were my 3 and 4, and I don't recall what order. I think I had Achane ahead of Chase Brown, but nonetheless, I thought very highly of these guys, and they've done very well so far, especially for fantasy purposes. And at this point, if we're too many concerns around Achane for me to just say outright that he has to go ahead of Chase Brown. So until we get more news, if we get more news on Achane, if it's good news, maybe I'm moving back. If he's back on the practice field next week, okay, I'm moving back ahead of Chase Brown probably. At the same time, I make this argument oftentimes when I have ties, it comes down to the better offense, and I think Cincinnati is the better offense to be within here. So both of them, though, bad defenses, and they're both receiving backs, so that should be okay in that sense for running backs. Let's bring us on to this next tier, because we might talk a little bit more about Chase Brown. I don't think so. I've covered that conversation, but that will be part of the running back updates. We'll just cover that I have moved up on Chase Brown very briefly now that I've covered it here. Wide receivers, starting off this next tier. A.J. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London. I have them very, very tightly in each other's, in a group here. And I think that we will talk a little bit more about this with the wide receiver updates. So that's the current order that I have them, but I will say I'm okay if you have them in a different order. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua right behind that. Puka, somebody who has been sliding with all of the bad news around Matt Stafford. That news does not seem to be getting better. This has been my concern since the moment that it happened, just like my concern for Joe Mixon. Sometimes you can read early tea leaves and they're not pretty. And I so far, I think I've nailed the analysis on the concerns for those two situations. Hopefully there's some clarity before the season. Always helpful. But nonetheless, I'm concerned about Puka Nacua, and I could see taking Josh Jacobs, Ashton Jeanty ahead of him, especially if you take a wide receiver in the first round. And if that news continues to be bad, I don't know that I get Puka behind Ladd, but it definitely becomes closer, and maybe I actually move Puka down a wide receiver tier into the Ladd McConkey, T. Higgins, JSN tier that I have. So Puka, Josh Jacobs, Ashton Jeanty, Ladd McConkey, Jonathan Taylor, Kyren Williams. Kyren also, I do think, would suffer if Matt Stafford's not the starting quarterback because he is quite touchdown reliant. He could become one of those guys where you're going to end up overpaying for him. He won't be bad for you. You're just not going to get what you need from him in terms of the tight ends, and he'll just be a high floor play. That will be a possibility. Next here, I've got T. Higgins, JSN, two guys who I have like a lot of confidence in, generally speaking, but a little bit of concern. And I should say a little bit of concern just in terms of the same with Ladd McConkey, where it's just like I'm not as confident as this group of wide receivers, but I am more confident than the next group. After those two, Bucky Irving, who may end up having to move ahead of Kyren Williams. That Matt Stafford news stays the same. James Cook, and then Omarion Hampton as well. Heck, I don't know. I mean, if we go into knowing Matt Stafford's not going to start the season healthy, maybe Kyren would have to go behind all of that group. That's possible. That's going to bring us on to this next tier, which starts off with all of the tight ends and the quarterbacks. I'm not going to sit here and play around with it. Obviously, you're not going to draft two tight ends in a row just following the overall rankings. In fact, just because I have this group here doesn't mean you have to draft either one of them. They're still in the same tier as all of these other guys. But this is the point where I'm comfortable taking a tight end or a quarterback, not both, at this point in the draft. And that's all that this is really trying to say here. And then, of course, I have them in the order of my rankings, which we will touch upon. A rankings change for the tight ends in terms of these three that I have made. And it's, once again, all three of them, I think, are very much, there's a reason that they're in the same tier as one another, and there's a reason that they're all in a tier separate from the other tight ends. But when we look at, do I draft a tight end or a quarterback, come here early third round in a 12-team league? It's early third in a 10-team league. This would be late third is where I'm comfortable. So somewhere in the third round is where I start to be comfortable taking a tight end or a quarterback once all these other guys are gone, the 27 players that I have higher than them in my overall rankings. And when it comes to which position I'm going to take the tight end instead of the quarterback. That's why I have them ahead of the quarterbacks. And the reason for that is the reason that you are drafting a tight end or a quarterback at this point in the draft is for positional advantage. And there's more scarcity of the tight ends. You're going to get an advantage against more teams, hopefully, of course, by drafting one of these tight ends than you will by drafting one of the 5 quarterbacks, because there's only 3 tight ends, 5 quarterbacks. So more weeks you're likely to come across a tight end that you have a clear positional advantage against than for the quarterback position. And so that is why I value the tight ends in this draft, strategy-wise, just a little bit more than the quarterbacks. The rest of this tier kicks off with this small tier of wide receivers that I have, which is Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, and I just moved Marvin Harrison into that tier, and I moved him up my rankings just a tiny bit, I believe, which doesn't look like I'm covering the wide receiver update. So, yeah, I moved Marvin Harrison up just a little bit as an upside argument thing. But he's in this tier with Tyreek Hill and DK Metcalf for reasons of not so sure about it, right? And so I think all these guys have very, very high upside. Will they hit that upside is a question mark to be had for sure. And, no different than Breece Hall here, followed by James Conner, who I feel quite comfortable with, but I do think there's some questions there, so I'm unwilling to get higher on him. Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, George Pickens to wrap up this tier, with my wide receiver rankings, of course, following in that order. And then at the very front of the next tier, we've got Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, which we will talk about that a little bit when we get to my rankings. Same with a couple of other things here. Well, no, we'll talk a little bit about my draft, a draft day decision that I had to make between R.J. Harvey and TreVeyon Henderson. You will notice I am not getting too crazy high on Henderson. I still have the same concerns that I've had for him all offseason, but also I get it. I get it, very much so. There's not much of a difference at all, even from Ken Walker to TreVeyon Henderson in this tier. So, rest of this tier after Alvin Kamara: R.J. Harvey, Tony Pollard, Zay Flowers, Jameson Williams, so a really high floor guy, really high ceiling guy, and then Chuba Hubbard, who is somebody who I have been lower on in my rankings all offseason, and the reason for that has been the addition of Rico Dowdle to this team. So, news coming out over the last couple of weeks, Rico Dowdle stealing some of the receiving work from Chuba Hubbard. I think going to steal some of that workload from him just in general, and that is why, he was a volume guy last year. He is not, I don't think, one of the most talented running backs in the league, and so I do think Rico Dowdle steals some work, and I think that takes that upside away from Chuba that he had last offseason, and we're getting reports to that effect. So that's why I have him here. If you think I'm a little too low on him, well, those are the reasons for it. Jalen Waddle right behind that guy, who I want to repeat something I've said. So for Jalen Waddle, really, really good news coming out of camp. Of course, we have all the strange things going on with Tyreek Hill, which makes him all the more risky of a pick, it feels like. And the connection between Tua and Waddle has been very nice. Other reports that's coming out of Miami, and that Waddle looks good. Now, my only thing here is that everybody who's gone up against this Miami secondary has looked good. So is Jalen Waddle looking better than he would if that Miami secondary was better? I think that's a probability, so I'm just a little bit hesitant to get too high up on all the reports coming out of camp positively for Jalen Waddle, but also still semi-excited about the potential there for him to have a bounce-back year after I've had him on 2 teams since his rookie season, and one went really well, and then last year was not so great. DeAndre Swift right behind that, Tedderell McMillan, Chris Olave. We'll talk about that, I believe, when we get to the wide receiver updates, followed by Aaron Jones and TreVeyon Henderson to finish this up. So, a couple of conversations for TreVeyon Henderson, Aaron Jones. This is one of those things where I think the roles are quite similar for them, although Aaron Jones being the 1A, TreVeyon Henderson being the 1B in a Josh McDaniels offense. TreVeyon Henderson, Josh McDaniels offense, it's a very, very nice match made in heaven, but the TreVeyon Henderson back has always been the 1B James White is one of the the bigger examples fantasy wise and everything just in general that existed within the Josh McDaniels offense, and I think that that's the role that TreVeyon Henderson has, and I don't think that he takes over as the 1A in that offense at any point, and that caps the upside. And so when I look at touchdown upside, generally speaking, I think Minnesota's offense is probably better than New England's. That's far from a guarantee. This is definitely something that I might flip on. I still think Aaron Jones has a little bit more consistent upside, a little bit more workload in general than Henderson on a week in and week out basis, however, as well. And then when you look at one of the decisions, so a lot of people aren't making that decision. A lot of people are going to just take Henderson over Aaron Jones. So I get that. I'll not try to convince you otherwise too harshly there. RJ Harvey versus TreVeyon Henderson is something that's much closer via ADP, and I think a lot of people are taking Henderson over Harvey at this point. Harvey is coming off of a decent showing in preseason, so that's good. Same with TreVeyon Henderson, has been doing very nicely throughout the entirety of the preseason. And his stock will be and continue to rise because of that. But I have liked RJ Harvey more because of the situation and the upside here. So I think RJ Harvey has a much more clear potential to be the 1A. The drawback to that is that hasn't been declared as what's going to happen yet from head coach Sean Payton. So there's still some ambiguity as to how long that could be something that will be onboarded. Is that something that the season starts and RJ Harvey's basically the 1A there? Or not. I mean, both RJ Harvey and TreVeyon Henderson have competition, legitimate competition, as in shared backfields, I assume, between J.K. Dobbins for Harvey and Henderson having Ramondre Stevenson, who, once again, is for sure going to be the 1A there, I think, for the entirety of the season. The other argument for RJ Harvey here would just be that Denver's a better team than New England is at this point, especially defensively, and good defenses give running backs more opportunities. So I think RJ Harvey has a higher ceiling across the entirety of the season and consistency-wise. Whereas I think when you look back on the season, which one of them is going to have more 30-point fantasy point games? Well, TreVeyon Henderson might have 2 or 3 of those, where RJ Harvey, might max out at 26 or something like that for his big games. TreVeyon Henderson, very, very explosive player. Not that RJ Harvey doesn't have any explosiveness to him, and he's got a little bit of trick play upside that I think will be unleashed at some point due to Sean Payton, part of the reason why he was probably drafted. That will bring us on to the next tier then, now that we got that conversation off with the last tier for my overall rankings, and then we're into like that 6th, 7th round area. ADP technically at that point shouldn't matter for you, just take guys. I have Devonta Smith at the top of this tier, followed by Brian Robinson, which I think is that conversation, something we should have right now, and Quinshon Judkins. So Brian Robinson, Quinshon Judkins, two potentially now looking more and more risky picks at this point. Well, Judkins, I moved up in my rankings. We'll talk about that with the rankings updates. Caleb Johnson right behind them, also looking like he's currently the RB3 there, so might have to be a little bit lower on him. Jerry Jeudy, Juwan Jennings, Jacoby Myers, Xavier Worthy, and David Montgomery to wrap this tier up almost. This is the point where now I'm not drafting the tier 2 quarterbacks or tier 3 and the tier 2 tight ends. However, once you get to this point, when I look at the available players for wide receivers, running backs, I'm okay, theoretically, not strategically, but in terms of player talent and everything, of taking those tier 2 quarterbacks or tight ends at this point in the draft. 7th round, Travis Kelce. I'm not going to harsh your mellow for doing that. It makes enough sense. I still prefer to wait a few more rounds, generally speaking, but that can always bite you in the butt if you wait a little bit too long, which is something that I potentially did in my draft. Dak Prescott's been a target of mine all off season. He ends up getting taken because I make a decision to risk it for the biscuit, and somebody drafts him. Instead, I end up with Drake May, who might end up being better than Dak Prescott anyways, but I don't have him ranked higher than Dak Prescott. So I feel like maybe I took a little bit of a step back there. Though week 1, it looks like Drake May's the better option. We'll say that. And then, because Philadelphia going up against Dallas week 1. And then for the tight end position, somebody went and took Dalton Kincaid. It was one of those things where they just took him earlier than ADP. That happens, and nothing I could have done with that. So then I ended up with a decision that we'll talk about at tight end when we talk about tight end updates that I've made and have that tier list up. I'm just going to record this right now. I just got done recording potentially 2 videos because the length of the video was a little bit long. I did my overall rankings, and then I did some rankings updates that I've had. I was going to do that in one video. I think I might split that into 2 videos, so this might just be my goodbye, my peace out, have a good one, my thank you very much. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video for both of those videos. All right, bye-bye.